Hi, I am Vivian, and we're going to learn how to make straight seams today. You know, I teach a lot of people, I teach young people, I teach adults, and one of the most challenging things that I'm asked is how do I make a straight seam? So that's what we're going to learn today. We're going to work with, I've already cut 2 pieces of cotton fabric, and what you should realize is that every time you work with a different fabric, there's a different way of holding that fabric, managing that fabric, pinning that fabric, where you actually result in a straight seam. So I hold my pins in a container from my dog food because I like to recycle. And I also use larger quilt size pins, which are right here. They're large, they have the yellow head because you can see them. If you're a new sewer, working with traditional 1/2 inch size dressmaker pins can be very difficult to see. So what we have to do is first we pin, and when you're sewing a seam, you pin perpendicular to the edge of the fabric. You want to try not to pin this way because one, you can poke yourself, the fabric can slide. And if you pin perpendicular, your fabric will stay put and it's easier to pull the pins out. If you're left-handed, you might want to pin your fabric this way, so once again you pull the pins out. You don't want to sew over the pins as a new sewer because if your foot pressure in making the machine go is irregular, you may snap either the needle on the machine or the pin, and neither one is particularly good. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pin, in this case, probably about every 2 inches. And because we're pinning 2 inches, because it's cotton, and cotton is a pretty stable fabric, and it won't move that much. If you were working with a satin, you would probably have to pin maybe every inch or maybe every 1/2 inch because the fabric is slippery and it's going to slide. Now, before we actually put this on the machine, I want to take a closer look to, I have a Brother machine here today. It's a basic machine. You can see that it's basic. But most machines, if not all machines, have markings here on the bed of the machine. In this case, it's a little bit of a grid, and there's a series of numbers. Use them. They're here for various purposes, but for new sewers, it's good to always use a reference. Even with experience, the references might be different where you have the edge of the fabric, but they always use a reference. When I teach young or new sewers, I often say use the edge of the foot. The edge of the foot right here is a good visual for a nice straight line, and then your job is less about moving the fabric as it is guiding the fabric against the foot. Okay? So for today we're going to, can I turn this? I'm sorry. We're going to simply line up the fabric right here. Okay, I don't know if I should do that. It's going to start, your needle starts right at the edge of the fabric here, okay? The fabric does not start at the back of the foot. It starts where the needle is because that's where your first stitch is going to be. Then, again, you guide the fabric. You have one hand here and you have a hand here guiding the fabric. Take out your first pin. Your machine wants to go in a straight line. I'm almost doing nothing here and my machine is in a nice straight line. And I continue now to guide, and I use the edge of the foot. Take out my pin, I stop, and I go again. Okay, and I keep going, and I have a nice straight line. Now, I'm going to take that out. I lift my foot, make sure my needle is up, and I pull to the left. And there's usually a little notch on the side here, sometimes it's here, but there's a little razor there. Now, the other thing that's really interesting on the machines that people don't realize is that there's a, if you can see, there's a little narrow to wide section here. And if I move this from left to right, you'll notice that the needle moves. So if I want a slightly wider seam, and I can still keep my fabric to the edge of the foot, I just have to move my needle. I don't have to move my fabric, so I'm still using the guide of my foot. Again, it's important for even seams so that your garments fit, or if you're doing quilting, that your seam allowances are all even, so all the pieces fit. So it's important in sewing that your seams are always accurate, or as accurate as you can. So I'm going to move this over here, and then we're going to make a wider seam. Now I'm going to sew on the same side here, okay? I'm going to go a little bit further. using the grid on the bottom, I can make my seams very, very wide. Again, I just put my fabric in. I'm just going to flip it over this way. And I'm going to use where my seam number is number 4 on my grid here. Again, I start with the fabric up by the needle. And I continue here by using another guide. And I have a nice straight seam. What I'm not doing is sewing in any direction with any width without a guide, because the only thing I'm left up to is what I see. And if I'm sewing something on an angle, a diagonal line, a dart perhaps, the visual can throw me off. So it's important that some guide is always used. When you're working with better machines that have more functions, you're going to have your presser feet, these foots, you have many, and many of the better machines have red lines. There's markings on here, and using the various markings on the presser foot itself is also referenced as a guide. So when you're a beginner sewer and you want to make a straight line, which is important because if you're making doll clothes, you have very little room, you have a 1/4 inch. If you're making apparel, it's 5/8 of an inch. So there's different allowances for different projects, all of which have to have accuracy. So the first thing in learning to sew is accuracy of your seams. Use a guide. The edge of the foot is how I teach my new students. It is very successful. It's very easy to see both the fabric and the edge of the foot, just like that. Use it, okay? Know that this will move your needle left or right. And then of course the stitching plate itself has a series of guides. So if you use those hints, you'll have straight seams and your project hopefully will come out wearable, pretty. The doll will love it, the dog will love it, grandma will love it, and it'll be perfect. So I hope you enjoyed this session, and come back. We'll be back again, and enjoy sewing.